Welcome back, listeners. Today I have Greg Milosevich, and Greg has a more than 25-year career in the life science research and drug discovery markets. He joined Beckman Coulter Life Services in 2019 and has served as the president of molecular devices, where during his leadership, he significantly accelerated growth, drove operating margin expansion, and led the acquisition and integration of IDBS and Forte Bio. Prior to his appointment as president of molecular devices, Greg served as the company's vice president and general manager of commercial operations, VP of Western markets, and he also held positions in sales and service leadership positions back to the early 2000s. He has since been promoted. He's now a group president as a part of the Danaher business as well. And so it's really exciting to have Greg on the show. He is a trusted client and ally in this space and has some stories to tell. Greg, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Julie. Pleasure to be here and looking forward to sharing our experiences that I've had along with this diversity and inclusion journey. Hopefully it can help some of your listeners.
Yeah, I fully expect it will. It's been a nice ride over the last year or so. We've been doing some listening sessions with employees, and so I've had the opportunity to really hear very vulnerable experiences. And I know Greg, as a CEO and now a CEO of CEOs, I think it's always challenging for folks to feel like what's going on the shop floor, and you know what's going on and you really know the behaviors behind diversity and inclusion. Mm-hmm. I'm curious for you, when did this diversity and inclusion stuff start to feel real for you? When did you have some aha moments along the way?
Great question, Julie. I'd say the reality versus perception of me really started by just asking questions. So in the course of asking women that report to me or report in the organization, what's it like to be a woman working for Beckman Coulter Life Sciences or what have you, or what's it like to be a Black man working, for the company, and then just listening. And so the commentary and, my perception of what I thought it was like versus what was communicated, to me was really the aha, eye-opening experiences there, sharing stories of things that you just take for granted as a majority male, white male in today's society was powerful, enlightening. And I would point out that, the process of going and asking these questions, it's really important that there's a trust established first to make sure you get a real authentic answer. And so I should have said that in the beginning here, but fundamentally
you're not just going up to people in the hallway asking that question.
Exactly. So there's folks that I work with that there's mutual trust established over time, over a period of time from working with them and just asking the questions and getting real insightful and authentic answers back was really what hit home for me during the journey that we're on and continue to be on.
Yeah. I think that's so real. And knowing you as a leader and how much you model healthy vulnerability for your team, just kind of putting yourself out there with people you have trusted relationships with and just saying, hey, just kind of taking a temperature on things, like how is your experiences maybe different than mine? Mm-hmm. And that's the beauty of just listening to that story, not judging it, not making it about you, not having to relate 100%, because you're never going to know what it's like to be a woman in the workplace or a person of color.
Right.
It's just empathizing and listening to that experience all the same. Greg, I'm curious, from your position now, being a leader of leaders and being in a company that absolutely values diversity and inclusion. I know we often say it's a journey, it's not a destination, right? It's never ending, which is like part of the fun. And it's also like why this work is so hard, because you have to stay on the journey, even when feel like you're not even getting anywhere. You're going forward and then you're going back a little bit. Tell our listeners, what has the journey been like for Beckman? What are the lessons learned as your career grows? Where do you think we're going from here too?
Great question. So if I could reflect back on the journey and what's been the learning along the way, I think there's a couple things that are nuggets that we're still working on as well. First, these are uncomfortable topics for a lot of people, including myself in the early days. So, having people get comfortable with uncomfortable topics is a key part of the journey. And I think the more you engage in the conversation, the more comfortable you get. I mean, generally, people are afraid of saying the wrong thing. And I think if there's trust and there's empathy established, it's okay. I think the audience realizes your intentions, and my encouragement is to not hold back on being in conversation just because you're afraid of saying the wrong things, because you probably will. The reality is, and that's okay. People will understand that. Another aspect I would say on this journey is, I'll call it grace and ease, and put empathy in there, is that these are difficult subjects, but we may be business leaders or working for a business, but before that, we're human beings, and understanding the human element of this, and having grace and ease, which we inserted into our diversity and inclusion mission statement for Beckman Coulter, I think was an important part of this, so that you take stock and realization that we are all humans. We're all on a journey together. There's a lot of challenging situations that are happening, that we have to deal with and manage. And to take a vested interest in wanting to be in the conversation, and not being afraid of having the uncomfortable conversations, and acting with a sense of empathy, grace, and ease is a big part of the challenge here. I think from a corporation perspective, what we continue to be challenged with is, how do you get the grace of ease, the comfort, and to a certain degree the skills to have these conversations at a leadership level. How do you drive that down throughout the organization to all levels of management? And that's a journey that we are still on. But to be thoughtful about that there's going to be folks, as you go deeper in the organization, that just aren't going to be comfortable, that may try to hide around this and it'll just go away in a few years, setting the stage that it's not going away. This is going to be part of our DNA for many years to come. It's never going to end. And to make sure there's an avenue for people leaders to be communicating, to get education and training along the journey, to help them get the comfort and getting the skills in place to have these conversations. So I think that's what I would reflect on as some of the key learnings we've had this year. Another thing is to realize it's emotional work. There are times when you're going to get feedback, and it's good feedback, because that means you're creating a trust in the organization where individuals are willing to tell you what's really going on. And compared to prior years, where I think we may have been getting lip service, as we've done this work and engaged with our diverse associates, and creating an atmosphere and a culture of trust, what you hear is going to give you some bad evenings and some bad weekends. And that goes back to the human element here, that if you're human, you have empathy, grace, and ease, and you care, you're going to have some tough times here. But you take that as a positive sign that your associates are willing to talk to you and give you feedback that is reflective of their reality, and that helps you to understand what's really going on and then take appropriate actions here to help improve.
Yeah, I love grace and ease. That's so good, because empathy is huge. Emotional intelligence, huge in the diversity and inclusion space. But I like that the pausing and the reframing that grace and ease offers, especially with those uncomfortable conversations that you might just not know how to navigate yet, but you're willing to learn. I'm curious, I know, Greg, I spend a lot of time listening to employees. Have there been, you talk about those bad nights and weekends, have there been some things that you heard that you're like, what? We're still here. I think for a lot of well-intentioned CEOs, we like to think we're further down, right? We're closer to like no end, but we're closer to that infinity point, and then we're still here. Have there been some things that are just like, no, it's just hard to unhear that or unknow what you've learned that maybe you wish you didn't have to
Yeah,
know?
great question. So my personal perspectives, I don't think any company is as far along as they think they are. Just because if you're actually engaged in active conversation with your diverse association of population of associates, this is part of the feedback that was tough to hear. If there's trust established and they're conveying what it's really like to be a Black man at my company, or a Black woman at my company, or a Latinx woman at my company, et cetera, et cetera. If that environment of trust is established, you're going to learn a lot in terms of what they're really going through and how they feel, how they're being treated. And some of the stories may be before your time. And that was the case that we've dealt with. But I think when you ask and probe more, you'll find out that some of these stories are still going on. And this comes back to, just basic humanity and being treated like a human being and being like a trusted colleague, and like and a friend. There's just the experiences that diverse associates have that are unique, and when you come from a position of caring, it's disheartening to hear some of the stories on what people are hearing, what they're experiencing in their day-to-day lives here. That there's two ways to look at it. At first, it was an emotional response and a retraction into reflection. But I've always come out of this with more conviction that we've got a lot of work to do, and trying to rally our teams around the work that we're doing here. So, but it's emotional work.
And I think listeners, a couple things that you so greatly described there, Greg. If you really want to understand what you can do to be more inclusive, knowing that you're not as far along as you think you are, that's a great point. You got to be willing to open your ears and listen to folks that have different experiences, and believe them when they share hard things. And to your point, this might have been something that happened 40 years ago, but it still happened within the walls of our organization, and someone's still processing that experience. And to your point, there's probably bizarre things happening and unfair things happening last week, last hour, unfortunately.
Mhm.
So keep your ears open. And if you ask, be willing to truly hear people and be willing to do something about it, which I know y'all have done with your deployment action plans. So it's not enough to just listen. It's also, we have to take action. We might need to reflect a little bit first, but then take action. And sometimes that means doing hard things too.
Yeah. There's an education component too as well. So if a company or a team is on this journey, just educating yourself through reading, educating yourself through training, understanding about unconscious bias, understanding about microaggressions, understanding about identities, intersectionalities. This is all an education process. So, to come into this, don't think you know everything, because you don't. You never do in life. And this specific topic, you really don't. But committing the time to educate yourself is part of our commitment, and something that I would recommend everybody to be pursuing, because we all need that. I mean, this is new for a lot of folks. It's new for a lot of team members, even the experienced team members. You always learn as you go through this. So there's an education component here that is really important as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know one thing you said earlier that strikes me as interesting is, a lot of organizations that I work with, and I know your organization, very much similar mindset, is like we educate at the top. Our senior leadership team, well versed in this, has spent time really understanding and spending some time talking about this. We know the importance of it because we're getting that from corporate and from board of directors and things. Front lines tend to be more diverse as far as a population representation goes, right? But the middle layers, that's where things get really sticky. What do you think is needed to get the attention of the middle manager that might think, oh, this is flavor of the month. This will go away in a few years. I don't have to do this hard work. And, I'm being
Yeah,
facetious here, Greg, but these people
I'll give
exist.
you two answers for it. So we tried to be systemic. We created a forum called BeckLS Voices at Beckman Coulter. And the purpose of that, and we started at the top. So basically, I led the first several sessions. And this was basically a forum for diverse associates and friends to be together and talk about what they're facing and common challenges and issues. This was the time of significant racial discrimination occurring, both for black population of associates, as well as our Asian associates as well. That was marked by some some pretty big issues in 2021. So setting up a forum for having those conversations was extremely valuable for those associates to jump in and share. And again, this is on the premise that you're creating this environment of trust and commitment. And we had these wonderful meetings, and I was so inspired. This is part of the emotional feel good work that came out of the work that we've done. And I think it sets the right stage for facilitating this. We've done several Becca-less voices, starting at the top level, going deeper in the organization. And we felt those were value added, create this forum just for associates to talk and share what it's like. And we had sessions set up for the associates and friends, so it was inclusive that everybody can join it. But we did have some sessions set up just for those diverse population of associates too. So we want to make sure we allowed both avenues there. So that was a key thing. The next part of the question is how do you get this systemic, throughout all levels of the organization? How do you handle what we call the magic middle? We haven't figured that one out yet, to be perfectly honest and transparent here. I get so frustrated at times when we still have challenges at getting the magic middle to get on board with the program here. And it's work that we keep doing. Now we keep trying to educate, we keep trying to make it easier. We put in place as well what's called Day of Understanding events, to where these are required to do that. This is where each manager must lead these sessions. And if you don't do it and you mark it down in our management systems called Workday, then it's going to affect your performance reviews. And so we're trying to use the carrot approach, but we've also got a stick here as well. And the general feedback I get is people are diving in, is they're really finding these discussions to be very valuable. And so we hope this can be systemic and we can keep getting progress here, again, at all levels of the organization. So
I love that accountability. I recently did a LinkedIn poll on 2022 themes, and accountability for DEI came up number one.
really, wow.
And there's no word you can pick, I think, to summarize where DEI is right now. But I do think holding people accountable, like you said, with the carrot and the stick, like, hey, try to recognize and reward you for doing this, and it's not closing the gap. So at some point, we do have to, use performance management, or how we promote people, to hold people accountable if they're not willing to take. And like you said, once they do it, they're like, oh, that was really cool. I understand things better. Day of understanding. How could you be against that? But
there you go. I do think long term that employees are going to vote with their feet.
Yep.
They're going to want to be part of a culture that you're trying to create here or not. And if not, then then they should go try to find that. And so we try to be clear that this is our culture we're creating. It's a journey that is not going to stop. We're using a Danaher tool called policy deployment to build process and breakthroughs here to keep driving this initiative here throughout the organization. But we're also cognizant that ultimately people are going to vote with their feet, just like we're going to vote, with our management decisions here. So we want everybody to get on board and come along this journey with us. But if not, then we have to manage the behaviors and take action accordingly. And again, the Day of Understanding accountability is one step there. But ultimately, the associates are gonna vote with their feet. So will leaders too.
Yep.
And another thing I see, just to jump in here, maybe a separate question, but a lot of what we see even in our organizations, there's a lot of focus on representation. So we want to go from X to Y in terms of percentage of our employees that are women globally, or are people of color. And to me, that's not the prize. That's not where the focus should be. You can focus on those representation numbers and actually achieve them, but unless you're successful in creating a culture in the company of inclusion and belonging, where everybody can show up and be their authentic selves, that's the real work. And that's where it's going to really matter. So unless we can get that right and keep improving that, then people are going to vote with their feet, and they're going to go find it someplace else. And your representation targets you're striving for are going to not be met. So I think that's really where it's at.
like you said, it's a lagging indicator. The leading indicator would
That's
be
right.
feelings of inclusion, feelings of belonging. The representation should come with that. And that's
That's
why the
right.
D doesn't work without the I, but so many organizations focus the knee-jerk reaction is focused on the D and the optics, not the inclusion, which is, harder to see and detect, I think sometimes. So it's funny how we try to make this easy. And that's something, Craig, I'm curious about as you're managing a lot of leaders, that education piece, especially if you're a white man. I really do feel for you because I'm a white woman, right? So I know the challenges of navigating a lot of these conversations, but I do have a vantage point of difference that helps me empathize a little bit more.
Mhm.
But I do feel for white male leaders, especially that have been in the workforce for 20 plus years and known the one way to do things. And now we're kind of shaking it up and it feels like, wait a second, like I didn't know it wasn't working for before it was working for me. Okay. Right. And so I think this is some of the nuance of that magic middle being like, nope, I'm not changing. That everyone else needs to change. It's not broke. Don't fix it. If you had to say, just having your own career and like had your own epiphanies of really showing up inclusively, I wonder what it will take to get people that are still holding back to join in. And I love the day of understanding. I love the focus on grace and ease and empathy. But I wonder what else it will take if you have ideas.
That's a great question. I wish I could say I have the magic bullet for an answer. I don't think I do. Um, you know, I think fundamentally the way that we're driving this is that to win the long term in the business, in our business, we're in a rapid high growth phase, and we are competing for talent. And so fundamentally here, to win long term, it doesn't really come down to the intellectual property of the company or the product portfolio or the markets you serve. Those are important, but it's going to come down to the people and the talent. And so to win long term, you've got to have the best talent. And to have the best talent, you've got to be looking at your talent sources, and they should be representative of the communities that you serve. And I've never seen a community that's just white men, whether it's a customer or a regional location, et cetera. So, the answer to the white men question is that they can walk around their communities, they can see the diversity in their communities. Some are more diverse than others, but they can also look at the diversity of the scientific community that we serve as a company, and it's rather diverse. However, it's not reflective in the companies that serve them. And so we try to leverage that education from the talent game and winning long term. That's what it's going to take. And this is a journey that is now, for lack of a better argument, a new job requirement in terms of building and hiring and retaining the best teams and new skills that we all have to learn and develop together. And that's the theoretical and empirical side of this. But I still am a believer that fundamentally, this goes back to the grace and ease question. There's a heart question here as well of what the right thing to do is.
Yeah.
And if you hire leaders that have the right hearts, have the right empathy, grace, and ease, it's a much easier journey for them to head down this path because they realize this is just the right thing to do as humans.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
those who aren't there, that's going to be a more difficult journey.
Yeah. 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 And that's part of the evolution, seeing people with those human skills be promoted, be represented, be recognized for that hard emotional labor that they're willing to do. At the end, it's the talent competition that we all have. I mean, I don't have any client right now that's like, we're good. We have enough people. Right? I mean, nobody's saying that.
Not
I mean, maybe
surprising.
in some industries that were really hard hit by all of this, but
Yeah.
pretty rarely, especially in y'all's space and the tech spaces and the manufacturing spaces, you can't get enough good people. And so if you really want to be different, it's been a long time since we could truly be different on things like product and price and commodity type of things. It's just so easy to replicate stuff. But your people, your culture, you can't replicate that very easily amongst your competitors. And so it's really fun to start to see this as a competitive advantage.
That's
And I think
right.
it's really smart of companies like yours that are growing, because you could be in high growth mode right now and just keep having a field day as is, right? But at some point, it stagnates. At some point, you're not going to get the lift that you could get had you spent more intentional time on this. So
Yeah.
it's fun to
We,
see
we,
that.
see- we see people applying for jobs now, which is really encouraging, saying, we've heard about how your company views diversity and inclusion, and we want to be part of that.
That's
So
cool.
we're now getting feedback to that effect on candidates as they're coming in to be considered for employment within the company. So that's an encouraging thing to hear back from.
Ah, that's so beautiful. I
You
love
know,
hearing that. And that just reinforces you're doing the right things, because to get the message all the way out to the public is a lot harder than within the walls of your company.
that's right.
But your employees are the best resource to do a lot of that sharing and connecting too. Greg, so many great nuggets that you shared with us about how to lead a culture of inclusion, tangible tools like the day of understanding and this grace and ease mentality, and some of the challenges knowing this work never ends. I'm curious for you, just in leaving our listeners with a tidbit, a takeaway, something we haven't talked about, or something you'd like them to know as a result of our conversation today.
Um, don't delegate this. You cannot delegate this to your team and your team members. You have to lead from the front. And if you're not willing to lead from the front, then you need to reevaluate whether this is something that there's several things I think you should evaluate, but fundamentally here, if you're not willing to lead from the front and set the example for your organization, your teams, it's going to be a long journey, and you're going to have a really difficult time building this environment of authenticity and inclusion and belonging here. So you need to be all in on this, and
Yeah.
it's not something that you can delegate because you're too busy.
No, no, but oftentimes I'm chuckling because I don't know how many times I don't get to meet the CEO, let alone the C-suite, right? And that
Mhm.
wasn't the case at all when working with you. You were very much there when you needed to be, and very much a part of the conversation. But a lot of times I think CEOs and C-suite, we punt this to the rest of the organization, and then we don't resource it. We don't take it seriously. When other business objectives compete for it, it's clearly something that's like put on the sidelines. So it's really refreshing to hear that. I think that message coming from you for listeners in the C-suite, or that have the ear of the C-suite, do not delegate this, and have the diversity person at that table. They're reporting
That's
into
right.
the HR. It's just silly, the reporting structures. Like, that just shows so quickly to the organization how not important that role is.
Um, yep, that's exactly right. So I can't say that enough about the delegation component. There's also, part of the education and learning is there's benchmarking opportunities.
Yeah.
Don't go out alone. I mean, I have the benefit with Beckman Coulter Life Sciences being part of Danaher Corporation. We have a lot of ability to share across the organization about best practices, what's working, what's not. But if you're coming from an independent, company where you don't have that, there are avenues for being able to go out and look and understand how other operating companies are handling this to try to take away best practices that you can bring into your organization, your teams, your company here. So, don't go it alone here. There's plenty of help out there. There's plenty of things you can learn from. There's podcasts like this where you can gain some feedback on the journey that I've been on here, and continue on here. But there is a lot of support. But you gotta take it and action it yourself.
Yep. 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 I think that the benchmarking point's a really good one. And it helps combat the perception that this is our industry's problem, or our organization, or our region. There are all
Mhm.
sorts of excuses. Then when you peel it back, and it's like, there really is no diverse industry or
No,
sector, or whatever people think, this miracle that happens somewhere else. It's like, no, this is everywhere. We're all operating in it, but you can only see sometimes your own vantage point. So it's nice to extend that vantage point a little bit.
absolutely.
Excellent, Greg. Well, thanks so much for connecting, for making the time. It just shows how important this is to you that, recently been promoted. When we scheduled this, we found the time and have made this a priority. And I think that just speaks volumes of how important this is to you and to Danaher as an organization. So really appreciate it. And I know I took a lot of nuggets away, took some notes over here. So hopefully our listeners did as well.
Outstanding. Thanks, Julie. Appreciate having the opportunity to come here and share with your listeners.
Thank you.
All
Thanks,
right.
Greg.
Take care.
Bye.